Happy Sabbath. Turn in your Bibles with me to Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 11, or on your device. Nice. For I know the thoughts that I think toward you, saith the Lord, thoughts of peace and not of evil, to give you an unexpected end. May the Lord add blessing to the reading of his word.
Well, I didn't kill anybody. I didn't assault anybody. I don't think I even hurt anybody's feelings. Oh, but I guess I'm getting way ahead of my story. It was a beautiful garden. Everything was lush and gorgeous. You couldn't have asked for anything more. If we had, God would have supplied it. I loved to sit in the grass. There was green, verdant grass as far as the eye could see. There was not a weed in any of it. It was a splendor to behold. And the trees seemed like they climbed to the heavens. Taller than happened after we had to flee the garden. The trees bore fruit, fruit like none other. Cherimoyas, they had rubbly skin and they looked a little funny. But they taste so good. The white flesh is especially the best one in the garden. Mangoes. They were everywhere. Have you ever seen a tall, tall mango tree? Draped with these big orange globes hanging all over them. They were good, but there was one better than it. I don't know how Adam came up with this name. He called it a dragon fruit. I'd never seen a dragon, so I really couldn't tell you if it looked like one or not. Well, they've got a white flesh too. Little black seeds all over inside them, equally as yummy as cherimoyas and mangoes. Pears. Pears were okay, but not near as good as cherimoyas. Avocados. I supposed it was Adam's favorite, if you could say you had a favorite among all the hundreds of things that hung there in the garden. Oh, yes. And you shouldn't think that the trees had a monopoly on everything. They didn't. There were vines that grew with wonderful, wonderful fruit. Grapes, you could eat them morning, noon, and night. They were wonderful and sweet. You know, I thought I knew a lot when I was there in the garden. God had talked to Adam and I, and he'd told us about his plan. He even told us that he'd overheard a meeting between Satan and his angels. This meeting was about how he wanted to win the battle, to take it over, to take over Adam and I, to see what they could do. Well, I knew that wasn't going to happen. Adam and I were very secure together. It was wonderful. We were guaranteed to be side by side. But one morning, as I was walking and doing my tasks around the garden, plucking a little thing here and plucking something there and trying maybe the apricot, I think that might have been it. I was probably eating apricots when I wandered a little too far from Adam, and I realized I'd gotten a little far away, but But I knew I was okay. He was just right over there. And as I walked and looked at the trees, only two really, hundreds of trees and hundreds of fruits and all the vines and the berries. We could eat them all. God only had two. Don't eat of the tree of good and evil, and don't eat of the tree of life in the center of the garden. No problem. And as I was walking and making my way around, there was a serpent in that tree. Seemed a little strange. Certainly beautiful. He kind of had golden burnished skin. Lovely to behold. And as I got a little closer, he spoke to me. His very voice drew me in. God's been talking to you, he said. Pardon me? I didn't know the serpents talked. Hadn't heard that before. We'd pet the lambs. We'd seen the cattle. We'd had the fish in the river. But a serpent to talk, had never heard that. And he bids me to come a little closer. And he says, see this fruit? Isn't it pretty? You know what? God just doesn't want you to be as smart as he is. Why, look at me. I've tried the fruit, and look what it's done for me. He was insinuating that now that he'd had the fruit, it made him talk. That's what he's trying to tell me. Really? And he says, you know, the only reason God doesn't want you to have this fruit is you'll be as wise as he is. Take one, just one. And I looked, and I thought, and I took a step closer. And I reached out. No. But the serpent was okay. Nothing had happened to him. So I reached out again, and this time I took it. There. I'm fine. Nothing's wrong with me. And then he said, that old serpent, he said, see, I told you nothing would happen to you. It's good. And then he said, try it. You'll like it. It was good. Maybe I do feel a little wiser and a little smarter. Perhaps the serpent is right. But you know what? I have to do something quickly. So I grabbed a whole handful of fruit, and I went across the garden, until I found him. Adam, Adam, look what I've got. See what I've got? A whole handful of fruit. You want some? You want to try some? Well, don't look at me so strange, dear. I'm just fine. See? I ate it. I'm fine. Don't you want to share with me? Adam told me later that his hesitation was because there were so many things going through his mind. The things that God had said to him and to me, that we weren't to touch it and we weren't to eat it. And he said, Eve, what have you done? What have you done? And then he took a bite. He told me later that he just couldn't imagine seeing us separated. I'd come from his very side, the one that God had made for him. God had this grand plan. The plan that they would always walk side by side and not be separated and not be tempted. And therefore, the earth would remain as it was. But it didn't stay that way. For after we'd had the fruit that we were not to have, and we felt the chill of the air because we no longer felt God's covering, we had to be ushered from the garden. Because you see, God could not take the risk that we might go and take of the tree of life. And then sin would reign forever, because of eating of the tree of life meant to live forever. So we're ushered out of the garden. That beautiful, verdant place that had been the only place we'd ever known. And now we're on the outside as two angels are standing by the gates to the garden. We can look in, but we can't go. And it's not very long before we realize, being on the outside, that there was a price to pay. The trees started to lose their leaves. Patches of grass changed color. Don't you know, a dandelion popped up over there in the grass, not in the flower beds where it belonged. It was now migrating away and becoming a weed with a mind of his own. God's plan was for the Garden of Eden to be perfection and for it to stay there and us to be a part of it forever. Let's change plans a little bit. Let's go to another lady. This lady had her hands full. Believe me, she did. One day, her husband comes in and says, "Dear, I've just had a talk with the Lord." She looks at him kind of strange. He's always talking to the Lord. What's different about this one? Well, he tells her, God's so tired of the sin on this earth that he is going to wash it away. Wash away sin? You mean like I scrub the clothes? No, dear, not quite like that. But he wants me to build an ark. Pardon me, dear? An ark? What's an ark? Well, I guess the only way I can explain it to you, dear, is, well, you know the vessels that you use to go to draw the water with? Yes, dear. Is that an ark? Well, I guess in a way you could say it is, only you put the water in so that you can bring it here, and we're going to go into the ark, and the water will be on the outside of the ark. Oh, whatever you say, dear. Oh, I must tell you, along with the discussion about the ark, he tells me it's going to be 4 stories tall, and it's going to hold all the animals. Animals? All the animals. Huh. Well, and we're going to be in there with them, dear? Yes, hon. That will be a frightful bit smelly, don't you think? The chickens make enough stink as it is. I can't imagine being in there with everybody. Well, we'll be there, dear. But God has a plan. And he's told me how to build this ark, and it's going to be just fine. But, dear, I need you to do some preparations for me. Oh, what's that? Well, you know the cases that you make for the pillows? Yes, dear, I'm working on one now. Well, I need you to make a few hundred for some specialty grain for the little ones. The little ones? Yeah, you know, the little ones, like the mice and the moles and the little ones. We have to have special grain, you know. I have to take care of that grain before we get on the ark so that they can have something to eat. You know, out here on the earth, they just go and fetch their own, but in the ark, it's just going to be lumber, and there's not going to be grain on the ground for them, so we're going to have bags of grain for them, and we have to sack it up. Now, the big animals, we have a great big hold that's taking care of that. You know, the straw for the horses and the elephants and all that kind of, it's all prepared. It's all taken care of, but you have a part to do. All right. So she set to work, you know, stitching all the way across here, all the way down here, hundreds and hundreds of bags for Noah's ark and the little ones. And then he preached. And you know, I went and told all my friends what he'd told me. Tabitha, Suzanne, Ruth, I told them all. And they were all ready to get on the ark with me. But you know what happens when you tell something too soon, and they have to wait a long time till it happens, and then the enthusiasm is all gone. Well, that happened with my friends, and it even happened with Noah's. Some of those same men that came and helped him build, in the beginning, they were all excited and they were all going to get on the ark with us. But the longer it took to build the ark and the longer for the time to come, they started to fall away in their belief. And why, in the very end, it was just Noah and I, the boys and their wives. I'd finished my sewing job years before. 120 years to keep harping on the same subject. People were tired of it. But I wasn't. Because it was pretty obvious God had a plan, and it became even more obvious the day that God said, "This is the day that I've made." And there, coming over the horizon, were sheep. 7 pairs of them. Some of them were a little young yet. They were kind of cute. They were gimbling their way along, following the older ones as they came to the ark. And behind them came the others. You know them all. Well, at least we think we know them all. I'm sure Noah remembered most of the names of them. Dragons. No, we don't think the dragons got on, maybe. But the horses and buffaloes, llamas, yaks, to name a few, all got on the ark. And then God sent an angel and closed the door. And it was quiet. Almost too quiet. You could hear the animals in the ark, separated a bit from our apartment. But no sound of gushing water. Day 1, day 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Nothing has happened, but there's a big din outside. I told you so, I told you so. Nah, 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 nah. What a stupid idea you had, Noah. He never lost his faith. Never lost it. It'll come. Night of the 6th. Family gathered in their apartment for prayer as a family, and one more time for God to manifest His will. And early on the next day, they heard the first strange sound of water coming from above and drumming on the roof of the ark. That didn't sound too bad. Actually, it sounded kind of comforting. You could almost take a nap listening to it. And then it got heavier. And before long, the deeps opened up and the water gushed forth. And if it were not for God's providence, the very boat that was holding us and those precious animals would have been torn asunder. That boat was just made by man's hand. Even Methuselah and Lamech had had a part in making our ship. They'd been laid to rest before the flood came. We were in this ark, and it was tossing and rocking and taking what seemed like a very deep steep into the water's depths. But we held firm in our faith. And every day, Noah made a mark. Day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4. How many days is this going to keep going on? How long can this ark survive? For 40 days, this deluge came down upon us, flooding everything around, spewing rocks into the air, and we could sometimes hear them as small pieces would hit our ark. We couldn't see out there, but it was thunderous and loud, and we were thankful for the protection that held us within. God had a plan. He wanted everybody who was willing to come and get on that ark with us. But in the end, only 8 people followed that plan. When they got off the ark, the first thing my husband did was make an altar and give a sacrifice. We were thankful to God when we looked around and saw the landscape and all that had been torn up, for His everlasting love and protection, and for His plan to save us. My next lady knew that God was downright foolish. She even laughed at him. Oh, yes, she did. Look at me. I'm old. I'm withered. Have a baby? You've got to be kidding, God. You've got to be kidding. I mean, you know, she'd already done her part. She'd told Abraham, you know, take Hagar, you know, have a baby, do the whole thing. And as far as she's concerned, it's done. And then they're at Mamre. And she's in the tent when she hears Abraham talking to strangers. She pulls back the flap a little bit and looks out, and she doesn't recognize him. But you know, for years, when we were young, Abraham told me about having sons. So many sons was going to carry on everything, you know, and that's why I gave him Hagar, and life was all good. But it wasn't finished. That was my plan, you see, not God's. God still had a plan. I didn't know how this was going to happen. I mean, when I was young, you should have heard the women in the village. Sarah's not pregnant. Sarah's not going to have any children. And Abraham says he's going to have many descendants. They're going to populate the world. He's nuts. She came to that phase in her life when she could no longer have babies, and the women that were her age were still shaking their head. They'd all had 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12 kids. She didn't have any. But now, here are these 3 visitors. And Abram calls them to come and to rest a bit. And he's going to wash their feet. And then he runs and gets a servant and says, quick, come with me. And he chooses the most youngest, tenderest calf he can find in the corral and tells his servant, kill that one and bring the fresh meat. And bring curds. And just what do you think Sarah did? Made bread. I mean, after all, what's a lady supposed to do when you have company? You make bread. And I think there was one more thing. I think besides making bread, I think she added a few extra morsels to it that she thought might please them. Perhaps she had some dried figs or dates to add to that. How about a few nuts? Ah, even then, pistachios, my dear, were wonderful. But the best of all was the sweet cakes that we made. Oh yeah, they are among the very best, you know. They as good as I remember them? Oh yeah, they were good. And she sent the food out with Abraham, and then she's just listening to the men talk, you know. They have a lot to say about the journey that they've been on. But then they bring up the fact they just said, I'm going to have a baby. I don't think so. Oh no, it's not going to happen. I'm too old. And then one of those men said, your wife laughs. No, I didn't laugh, I said. And then he reprimanded me and said, I did laugh. Within 1 year, he said, you'll have a baby. And true to his word, almost a year later, there's Isaac. We named him Isaac because his name meant to laugh. And as the Lord and Abraham and I and the baby are there. We know it's a fulfillment of God's plan. Our last lady was an innocent young girl when she was told that she would bear the Son of God. The man who will come to save the world. That's what I was told. It was very frightening. I felt kind of alone because I was so young. And Joseph, what was Joseph going to think of me? We weren't even married yet, and I'm told by God that I'm going to have a child. God even had to come speak to Joseph and let him know so that he would understand. And then there was a plan that none of us had planned on, and that was going to be taxed. And so we had to leave home and go down to pay the taxes. It was getting bigger, and it was harder. But worst of all was leaving my mother and nobody that I knew to be my midwife, and I was all alone with Joseph. And we get to Bethlehem. It's late in the evening. I'm tired. My feet are swollen. My back hurts. Nothing's good. I just want a comfortable place to lay down. And finally, we find a barn. Some people might have thought that was a hardship. But let me tell you, that hay was wonderful. You could just lay back in it and relax. And before long in the night season, our boy was born. It didn't take me very long to figure out this child had a mind of his own, very different than his brothers, whom I inherited through marriage. He would just kind of disappear, and you'd find him over here talking to a group of people, or you'd find him over there talking to a group of people. When he was 12 and we went to the temple, we totally lost him for a while. When we finally found him, sorry to say, I gave him a little tiny piece of my mind, and he told me that he had to be about his father's business. All those growing up years, oh, you should have seen the miracle at Cana. It was wonderful. Turning that water into something that the people just gushed over how wonderful it was. But it wasn't to be my praise, it was Jesus' praise. And then, following along, watching the miracles, the people that followed him, and how great everything seemed to be going. And then people started to turn against my son. He'd done nothing but good. And now, here, they were being nasty, calling him bad, wanting to take his life, wanting to get rid of him. He'd only healed people, made people feel better about themselves. And then the day came. When I stood at the foot of that cross and I watched him hanging there for me, his mother, for the disciples that were around him, and for those who still stood by him and called him Master, and now saw that he was fulfilling a greater plan, a plan that God and he had together, to once again make this earth that had started with Adam and Eve and in its perfection, to be able to make it whole again. God had a plan. And every day, he has a plan for you and for me. It's a matter of whether we're willing to be a part of that plan. Like Amy read in Jeremiah, he only wants what is good for us. And as we go out of this place today, the words we say, the actions that we have, are all a part of that plan. How we treat the ones close to us, and how we treat the ones with whom we work and we interact with every day. They're all a part of God's plan. And this talk came about because every Sabbath, you have a part. Every Sabbath, our congregation sings, God has a plan for my life. Do you believe it? Or is this just something that you do for the kids every week? I hope you truly believe it, because you and I are part of his plan. Thank you.